In a moment, I'm going to use the words, "It's a different kind of show today," because it is. So before I start, I want to change it up a bit and thank our sponsor first. That being mpb.com. I was clambering about in my loft a couple of days ago, trying to find a box of old pictures that I'm wanting to use for a photo project that I'm putting together. They're pictures from my childhood that I think mainly Mum took actually on the family's Kodak Instamatic. Yes, the famous red arrows shots will be in there that we've talked about before. You know the ones. What's that, Mum? What's that picture? That's the red arrows. No, it's not. You've got like dust on the... Not dust. Or maybe it's a fly. But no, it's a red arrow. No, it's too small. That was Mum's famous red arrows shots at air shows. It didn't really have the right lens, being a Kodak Instamatic. Everything looked like tiny little flies in the air. Anyway, I found, as I was looking for this box of picters, which I did find in the end, I also found a 50mm Canon 1.2 lens, only a flagship, and a 24-105mm lens, of which I had a couple. This must have been the first. I'd forgotten I had them. There they were, a few miles under the hood, granted, but they are mint, well looked after, and in their original boxes, which a certain colleague of mine doesn't get. He throws the boxes away, which is hardly very eco-friendly when it comes to selling. But by the by, I thought, hang about, these two gems could be worth a good chunk of my airfare to the India adventure in 2025, which has now, by the way, been officially released as an itinerary. It's on the website, photowalk.show, under India 25, and Sam is jealous because she's seen we've tweaked it slightly, and it includes one official wonder of the world, if you go by the list of 12, and, another place that frankly should be, and so much other things that we'll be seeing and witnessing. But anyway, that's India 25. Half the spots have gone, by the way, as I write these notes, in under 24 hours. Anyway, yes, having found the two lenses, you should expect to see them soon on mpb.com. And if, like me, you have a similar experience and you think, hang about, why are these in a box in an attic when really they could be delighting a brand new owner? So here's how it works if you want to sell or trade your quality used camera kit and fly on a plane with me to India. You go online to mpb.com, you click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading, and then just follow the instructions. You're prompted to enter the model name, you click in a box what kind of condition it's in, and from there your kit gets collected from your front door, and MPB, they pay you for your camera gear within days. Can't argue with that. So make more money and avoid sneaky seller fees too when you sell to MPB with a price commitment that gives visual storytellers like us the right price up front for our kit. I'll have a link on the show page today. Or you can remember, very simply, mpb.com. So yes, here are those words. It's a different kind of show today, since I took a week off this week, it being a school vacation week. It's not really been a week off because I'm still sort of recording this. But yes, we decided to spend a bit of time with family. However, I'd miss you if we didn't talk to each other this week. So I've made a show, though granted there's no feature interview, no new letters, and actually some of what you'll hear dates back almost as far as when we were still wearing masks and throwing ourselves into bushes when a walker came the other direction towards us, threatening to breathe into our space. Heavens forbid we might encounter a jogger breathing huge plumes of God knows what into the ether. Our Jack in particular, our eldest, he got very good at breathing in and holding his breath until he was convinced the jogger's spittle had lost its battle with gravity and settled on the floor safely again. But so what I've done today's show, if you are visiting this program for the first time ever, this isn't what the shows usually sound like. This is what you might call a holiday special. But let me explain. What I've done is compile what may seem like random thoughts in places, but I thought you might like to take a glimpse backstage with your ears, if that is physically possible. So this is a mention, really, for our other sponsor. though it's a collective, actually, a community of people who for a number of years have been supporting what I do on this podcast through Patreon. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for them and MPB, of course. These are all segments taken from our Patreon shows that, unless you are a patron, you'll not have heard. The additional shows were originally called More, and then they became The Extra Mile. But in essence, the whole reason for doing a Patreon show was that, if you were going to support me, then I wanted to do something extra for you. And that's why it became called The Extra Mile in the end, you know. You walk the extra mile for me and I'll walk the extra mile for you. And so there's always been another show, a show that's sort of hiding behind the curtain, just over there. But you may not have heard it. You've probably heard me mention it, of course, but you may not have heard it. It may sort of slipped by and you thought, I must one day go just take a sneaky glimpse and see what all that stuff's about. But today really is a chance to find out what it is about. In the early days, they were very much diary pieces, sort of standalone recordings about the life of a creative that I used to write, and you'll hear some of those coming up now. Then there were the rolls of 12 short interviews where different photographers, some who belonged to the community and some who were guests who'd appeared on the show, would pick 3 or 4 numbers from a roll of 12 photographic questions, see what I did there, such as where would you go if you could teleport yourself anywhere in the world to photograph? So you're about to hear some of those. And then there are other moments from more recent extra mile walks, which I'll put in and hopefully will make sense. They are standalone pieces, so there may be moments where you think, hang on, what's he referred to there? But I've tried to miss those, but some will inevitably sneak through, and you'll hear some of those as well. Each piece will be punctuated by a musical bumper, as they call it in the trade, so it's clear where one bit ends and another bit starts. If you hear these and you think, oh, I never knew this existed, and would see the value of joining our community to support the show, because it's not free to make, and also think, I quite like this trove of other bits at my disposal, then I'll pop back at the end of the show to share how you can do that. Although actually it's easy. If you go to I might as well tell you now as well, go to the PhotoWalk website, photowalk.show, click on the button, top right hand corner, it's all orangey yellow button that says support the show, and it's very easy from there. You get the Extra Mile shows and all the ones that came before it, so there's hundreds of extra bits. You get them actually on your normal podcast player app. It's like magic. And, well, we're going to start the magic by jumping aboard the Time Traveller and travelling back to the start of this decade. Welcome to a new audience today, a just for one day department store kind of offer, because I'd like you to meet the patrons. I'd like the patrons to meet you. And I have a very important question to open up to a wider set of ears. Today, my thoughts with your conversation after is about art, about the study of the naked form, about objectification, about feelings. Now, I don't presume to have nearly as much knowledge as one would require, darlings, to talk with any deep or great knowledge about art. But today, I'm going to try, and I'm going to attempt this for good reason. I've just heard a quote that I'll inject as an Easter egg. It so lends itself to photography and what you believe about what you make that I instantly put pen to my bedside notepad upon hearing it and scratched a few words to produce today's thoughts. I've split this then into 2 parts over the next however many minutes or so. And here's part 1, but part 2 connects, as you'll hear. Remember the latest Patreon photo challenge for those that are members? Not so numerically entered for a subject I didn't think was quite as challenging as a selfie the month previous, but then I know some things engage and some draw a kind of, maybe. The challenge was to produce a photograph that answered, quote, I love ... One of the entries that arrived had me pondering. Now, I'm not squeamish. I'm certainly not a prude. You don't get to lose all your hair and grow a grey beard without seeing a little more of the world than you might otherwise have expected. For example, In the latter part of my teens, the disco years as I call them, I was part of a circle of DJs under the umbrella of a small entertainment agency run out of a smoke-enveloped basement office under a block of soon-to-be-condemned flats in Waltham Abbey, just north of London. The youngest of the circle, I got awarded the, let's call it, less coveted gig. And so, aged 18, I was farmed out to a divorced, separated and singles joint, during a time online dating hadn't provided an alternative to a club so thick with tobacco smoke that hung in the air like a stratocumulus cloud formation that it would have grounded aircraft for days had it ever escaped from the illegally chain-locked fire escape. The club had carpet that was a warmer red than the day it had been fitted thanks to the amount of stout slopped across it. There were special private booths that you couldn't quite see into. The lighting was very red too. You could organise your dance floor display with any prime colour of your choice as long as it was red. And there were 2 podiums. I'll leave that to your imagination. This place was a product of its time. I think that's the way it's referred to these days, isn't it? My DJ colleagues didn't want it, and the management knew it, so the pay was a little higher. Every smoke-dense cloud, and so on. Let's just say that my 2 years in that club, with security provided by a stocky man called Scarface for very apparent reasons, who'd spent many years in the scrubs, the wormwood variety, not the medical sort, was a proper eye-opener. I was fascinated by Scarface's years in Worms, as he referenced it. Nobody questioned him, what he said went, and he had a big fight and trouble button, in red of course, next to my booth, which when pressed silenced the endless loop of Kool and the Gang and turned the floor lights from a flashy red to bright football stadium flood white in just under 1/50th of a second, to give it a photography reference. My education in life complete, my one regret is that I didn't photograph those 24 months from the relative safety of my DJ booth. What a gritty underground HP5 story missed. All this to underline that nothing much surprises me, on most levels anyway. But 2020 and 2021 have me in retrospective and introspective mood, or mode perhaps. I had a discussion at the end of last week with a member of this wonderful Patreon about a YouTuber, a reasonably successful one actually, one I'd not encountered before, one who I imagine is of a similar age to me. And if you rate success by subscription numbers alone, I kneel before him as his apprentice. He's really rather good. He's friendly. He has a very camera-confident style. He's approachable. He's authentic. Not part of the awesome brigade. If there was a gig going for a TV InVision continuity announcer, he'd have it, with my blessing. But as I studied his most successful films, tuition ones about camera and light work mainly, the sort of thing you see all across the platform, one thing troubled me. His requirement to use young female models for everything. That's not to suggest any misdoings, of course. It's just a 2020-21 observation of what we've seen, what went before, and where we are now. Where is the wonderful lighting tutorial featuring a beautifully mature, well-lined old man with a beard? Nowhere, actually. Was it possible that I was becoming prudish? Do I need to spend another few years in the company of Scarface again, though I suspect he's back with worms? Of sorts. Perhaps so, but I couldn't get away from the fact that it felt like I'd just walked into the photography expos of old, where people tried out new cameras and trained the latest lens lineup on a plethora of young female models, and I wondered if it were time to call time on what feels like an extension of objectification. Don't get me wrong. There's a place for the human form. Of course there is. There's a place for boudoir. Of course there is. How it's photographed, painted, recorded is, of course, the subjective conversation. Artland magazine puts it so well. Nude photography has been a genre of fine art photography since the inception of the medium in the middle of the 19th century, depicting the nude human body with a particular emphasis on form, composition, and the emotional qualities evoked by such. So let me take these thoughts and return to the photo challenge from last month, and a picture I received from one of our very important supporters from day one. I love ... That was the challenge. Just send me a photograph that says, I love... ... His love was his partner, quote, his muse, his Georgie O'Keeffe. There's a story for another day. It was well lit, artistically treated, scratchy nude portraits, some might say of a more provocative style. I showed it to Sam. She loved it, immediately. What's your problem? She asked. Oh, nothing, I think, I replied, but I'm wondering what members of our community may think, say, or feel, because it's a subject we've not really spotlit before. There, that was what was troubling me, apparently more so than Sam. The picture wasn't gratuitous. Thought had gone into its composition, no doubt. It was personal, it was poised, it was clearly precious. Was I, for the first time, thinking that this kind of work was trouble in 2020 and 2021? Had what was introduced during the 19th century become more tentative or indeed sensitive centuries later? Nude study is surely still important. It still has its place, yes. It still represents a genre and many subgenres in and of itself. Diane Arbus made her own studies of form in the Nudist Camp series. Helmut Newton's controversial approach to voyeurism brought him on a collision course with mainstream magazines, one that he won, actually. Mapplethorpe claimed he didn't like the word shocking. He was looking for the unexpected. Annie Leibovitz brought the naked beauty of pregnancy to the fore with her front cover of Demi Moore. And let's not forget Leibovitz made the much-celebrated picture of John Lennon naked in a fetal curl whilst placing a kiss on a fully dressed Yoko's cheek just hours before he was murdered. That quote still stands as one of history's greatest images of both love and loss. And this whole question is actually a question for you. What are your feelings about form, objectification, and where the so-called line exists? Where is that line? And what parts are a product of a time that's now nudged knowingly along? And so part 2, art. I watched the British artist Tracey Emin talking about her battle with cancer the other day in a short television interview. Shamefully, this story had rather passed me by. Whilst the news was busy, of course, with Brexit, to be joined by COVID, then of course Black Lives Matter last summer, a story about one of Britain's most celebrated, often misunderstood, very outrageous, definitely Britpack artists slipped the net. Well, for me anyway. Tracey Emin is, in terms of her artwork, for many, to use a British phrase now, a classic Marmite experience. You don't see an Emin work and say, yeah, quite like that. She doesn't attract insipid description like quite or nice. You either appreciate it or you don't. Simples, as that advert goes. She was a disruptor, and the art world doesn't really warm to disruptors, as an episode with David Yarrow suggested a couple of weeks ago now. It's 22 years since that moment I went to the Tate Gallery, not necessarily specifically, but with every intention to see, or if you will, witness, Tracey Emin's installation called My Bed, part of the Turner Prize exhibition. If you're unaware of this piece, it essentially does what it says on the tin installation. Picture this, a large gallery space. In the middle of that generous space, a blue rug lies adjacent to an unmade bed, with an assortment of items around it, including a pregnancy test, empty vodka bottles, cigarettes and, well, other stuff. It's a mess. Well, it's a bed in a mess, and represents a long bender spent in a bed, presumably not that one, following what the artist Tracey Emin describes as a bad relationship breakup. Of course, an unmade bed in such a prestigious gallery within a world-leading prize exhibition was bound to cause controversy and conversation, and it still is, many years later. Sam just looked over my shoulder to see what I was researching and writing about, and I showed her a picture of said bed. Oh, she dissuasively sounded. That one. Yeah, I remember that. I didn't need to inquire further. Back in 1999, I lingered at this bold display for a long while. Of course, I don't remember what was really said, but I reckon the air was thick with whisperings of, an empty bed. She should see the state of mine. Why is that worth a prize? My teenager does that every day. I don't think much of a vodka brand. But this was in every way a self-portrait and drew as many fans as it did detractors. Detractors' voices, though, can of course be the loudest, or maybe they're the ones we just hear as creatives. In my own very, very small way, I know that, say, 20 beautifully well-written positive comments will be battered into touch by one thoughtless, less grammatically correct one. You know the kind of thing. You is shit. Fortunately, though, with age comes more ability to smile wryly and correct their grammar, whilst leaving something Tracy couldn't back in 1999, a smiley emoji. Critics did what they could to protect the equilibrium, but it made no difference. A new voice had arrived, and Tracey Emin was the star behind that voice. The Turner Prize went in the end to Steve McQueen, but as is frequently pointed out, the real prize was that it launched Tracey's name internationally, though she'd been a bubbling name for a good few years prior. Over 2 decades later, Tracey Emin is a trailblazer still, though she is no longer the youngest one making all the noise and upsetting the establishment. To quote a recent GQ magazine article I read while researching this, if you think about Me Too and Time's Up, I've been talking about women's issues the whole time. I've been making work about being treated shit as a woman all my life. The difference now, she says, is simple. People don't think I'm moaning anymore. Rock and rap stars, international train terminals, airports, private collections, public collections, oligarchs possibly, all own, collect and display her works, and if I could, I would, though it would probably have to be in a room where my mother-in-law didn't visit. Tracey Emin is most certainly in the list of people I would like to make a portrait of. Right up there, at the top. And so we arrive at 2020 and 2021 again. She's been working on an extraordinary new exhibition, The Loneliness of the Soul, featuring work from one Tracey Emin, born 1963, and Norwegian modernist artist Edvard Munch, born 1863, 100 years apart. Talking about this exhibition could be another edition all of its own. But during this time, and the curation of this work, Tracey Emin has been ill. In the BBC interview I saw, she maintained that art kept her alive after being diagnosed with bladder cancer last summer, requiring significant surgery. You can't keep a good Emin down, though. The work comes from an energy, she says, and it's an energy I can't hold within myself that has to come out. And if it doesn't come out, I feel like I'm going to spontaneously combust. And here's the money quote. Stand by. This is what I've been waiting to share with you, and what I'd very much like you to think about following the first part of this piece. And, if it makes it easier, replace the word artist with photographer. In Tracey Emin's words, as an artist, you don't have to make art that makes people happy. You have to make art that makes people feel. Sean Tucker is my guest on this Extra Mile today. Some extra thoughts from this philosophical photographer YouTuber. Now there's a title. Sean, we have a feature on the Extra Mile called The Roll of 12. Essentially, think of it like a roll of film, but instead of a frame, it's a question. So 12 questions. Lightly photographic and creative. A different kind of question. Lighter in nature. I tell you what, let's do 3. See how we fare with 3 of those 12 questions. Choose a number between 1 and 12.
Give me number 10.
Number 10. Where have you been, or what have you done that you may not have had you not found photography? Now, it's interesting because in our conversation, photography comes up as a Trojan horse, as you describe it. But it has taken, I mean, being a YouTuber, if you don't mind that phrase, has taken you to places and people that you wouldn't have done otherwise, surely.
Yeah, it's been less places, honestly. Well, actually, that's not true. I think I have traveled a lot to physical places that I might not have been to had it not been for photography, either through YouTube or through photography as a full-time job. In fact, I think the year I started the channel, I was still working full-time. And that year was my job in the company was head of video and photography for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I traveled a lot in that year. So going the route that I did, you know, it was Italy, Spain, France, Sweden, Dubai. All in the space of a year. It was there was a lot. I mean, there's a lot more than that as well.
Is that job still available? I'd like it.
It probably is, because I told him to shove it, so you can have it.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Had its downsides.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Maybe a favorite for me is going to Namibia to shoot with the Himba.
I wondered whether you'd say that. Yeah.
I have been to Namibia before that. Yeah. It wasn't a new trip to take, but I think going and spending time with that tribe definitely wouldn't have happened unless I had a camera to get in there. It was a reason to go, and a reason that I could explain to them I wanted to be there, that they were happy with. So for me, I guess my camera was a passport into that community for a few days, which was an amazing experience.
Did you stay with them?
I stayed on a camp. So basically there was a setup there where there was a campsite about 1 kilometer away. Because they would obviously prefer you don't live in the village with them. But the campsite is set up so that you can camp there. And if you want to come and visit them, someone will come and fetch you and they'll bring you in for the day. Right. So I stayed 1 kilometer's walk away, just down the road.
Go on then, another number.
3.
Number 3. Which, I like this one. Which, and I think I might guess who you might say. Which one photographer, which would you invite to dinner, and what would be your first question to them? Let's go for the photographer first, and you can think about the question.
Well, there's 2. I have to choose.
I'll let you have 2.
You think? Well, I mean, obviously, one is Joel. Obviously,
I think that was the one I was going to guess. Yeah,
Joel Meyerowitz would definitely. But I don't have a specific question for him. I just want to hear him talk for hours. But he's wonderful to listen to. Yeah. But the other one is Joey L.
No, Joey that Lawrence, is not a name I would have expected you to say at all.
I think Joey is a fascinating guy.
Yeah.
I've always loved his photography, and to be really frank, I've definitely for a while was trying to rip his style, because I really love that mix of strobe and ambient that he does is so well judged. So I used him as inspiration for a long time. But what I love about Joey is he lives with one foot in that commercial world to pay his bills, but another foot in this world where he's making the work that he really believes in. So he's going to the Omo Valley to shoot with tribes there, and then he's bringing a lot of money back to help them to make a film that they script and direct and act in. And he's just bringing the cameras. He's going and embedding with Kurdish fighters in Iraq to tell their story.
That was amazing.
He's going to plantations in the Far East. He's going to tea pickers and coffee pickers in South America to make work about families who work together. Like, this is not necessarily stuff he's being paid lots of money to do, but he cares deeply about the work and telling those stories. And anytime you see him on documentaries, you're like, wow, here's a guy with a good heart. He's pointing his camera at things because he's got a good heart and wants to tell his stories. And I just feel like I would learn a lot from him about how he balances that, about what drives him, about how he finds the courage to keep doing it.
Courage probably would be one of those first questions. I've written to Joey so many times. He's never written back.
I'll ask him that as well. Why don't you respond to Neil?
If you could, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Right, last question.
Let's do 8.
Number 8. What is the famous photograph you wished you'd have made yourself?
Oh, that's a tough one. Oh man, I hope you can edit out this pause.
I don't know. I might lengthen the pause.
You will, won't you? That's a really tough one.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know who took the picture, but I often fantasize about getting a time machine and being able to sneak back in time somewhere for a day with my camera.
Me too.
With my skills and being able to capture a world that I don't get to see now. There's a particular photograph of it's London in the 40s during the Blitz, and it's a bookstore which has had the roof completely blown off it, and there's just rubble everywhere, but there are still books on the shelves covered in dust. And there are a couple of patrons standing in the bookshop looking through the books, still using it as a bookshop, even though it's a complete war zone, completely bombed out and everything, and the roof's probably about to cave in the last little bit, but it's lit beautifully from above because there's a huge grey hole in the roof. But yet people are just carrying on, looking through books. I just think that kind of says so much. There's so many layers to that about our world and about the human spirit and how we carry on, about how, I love that image, and I'm embarrassed to say I have no idea who took it, but I would have loved to have taken that shot.
Andrew Hardacre, another of our patrons, spoke with me for the feature starting next week called 5 Things. If you've missed the last couple of episodes of More, this is where I'm asking you to recount 5 things you love about photography. It can actually be wider than that. 5 things that are special about photography. 5 things you otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to do minus photography. 5 things photography has done for you mentally. 5 things that you get the idea. Every week on More, for the duration of this feature, you'll be hearing from patrons sharing their 5 things. And I'm hoping to speak with you too. You might have thought that many of the answers may be along a similar theme, and perhaps they do share emotional similarities in places. But if we took the photographic theme of, say, the word smile, and all went off to make a picture by lunchtime on said theme, we'd be chombling on post-shoot pizzas with a set of single pictures based on one word, but each with its own approach and language. Our experiences wouldn't be the same for such a simple 5-letter word. 10 photographers have so far shared their 5 things, and Andrew Hardacre was one of the first. Following our chat, he pulled a tin from the shelf behind the webcam. It was the kind of tin you'd buy biscuits in. In fact, Andrew, I think it was a biscuit tin, wasn't it? On the top of the tin, there looked to be an ever so slightly faded picture of a lifeguard. Not the variety of lifeguard wearing swimwear watching over the incoming surf, but a uniformed officer of the household cavalry, who from memory, though this bit's a little bit sketchy, was stood in front of Buckingham Palace. The type of touristy biscuit tin lid picture that you'd probably find dressing a collection of shortbreads in the Harrods food hall. Within the tin, though, not shortbreads, not even Garibaldis, something far more precious, if that's even possible. Photographs upon photographs collected by Andrew's father. Family pictures, legacy keepsakes. Some made of people Andrew couldn't identify, but the family history resided pictorially within that tin, and Andrew is now custodian. And it got me thinking, many of us will have a similar tin, figuratively. For some that could be a cardboard box, I guess, a shoebox perhaps, an old money tin. And in my case, well, quite literally a case. A briefcase, the one my father used for much of his working life, well, the years I remember, at any rate. The photographs, various documents, Dad's farming certificates, they were all decanted into this briefcase in the late 90s following his passing. That and I believe an old brown suitcase too. Then these cases went to Mum's attic. 13 years ago, when she passed, the case came to our attic. I've seen it a handful of times and I've visited the contents too, but mainly for estate reasons. So I went in search. Right. Let's have a look in the attic. Not my favourite place in the world. Great if you want to look for spiders. Here's one straight away. Nice. So I'm looking for a suitcase. It's going to be down the other end, which is the last time I came down here. I really look at these cobwebs. Don't look up. There's that film. Don't look up. Where's it gone? What have we got in these boxes? This looks more likely. Ah, here it is. This is the case. Delsey briefcase. Let me. I need to take the cobwebs off this. So, let's. I hope I don't need a key because there are locks on here. Hold on. No, that one's fine. Left-hand latch, good as well. And, well, let's have a look inside. So the first thing, there don't appear to be a lot of photographs. There are some photographs. There's some here. This looks like it was taken on their honeymoon. It's a black and white picture here. That's clearly Mum and Dad, and there's a couple of other people there that I don't know. I mean, they look like friends they've made. in Spain. It was the only time they actually went abroad as a couple. For my entire childhood, we always holidayed in Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Southwold in Suffolk. But as much as I used to beg to get aboard an aircraft, please, can we go to Spain? There's lots to see in this country, my dad would say. When we finished exploring our country, we'll go and explore some others. And we never did, not as a family, anyway. There's some cassettes. What are these? Oh, these are cassettes that my father kept from, oh, look at that, a first show on Radio 1, one from Lanzarote. Yeah, there's cassettes. Then, look at this. There's some books in here as well. And this one is particularly precious. Mr. Fairweather and his family, which is, it's a whole other story in itself. This is the book that Mum and Dad used to read to me to get me used to the idea that I was adopted. The illustrations, I haven't seen this for years. Oh, fantastic. I'm so pleased that this was not thrown away. Starts in a pet shop, looking for pets to fill their lives. Works through to, I remember the story, works through to adopting a little boy. Then at the end, let me have a quick look. It's not a big book. Yes, at the end, the boy gets an adopted baby sister. What's this? This is a letter. So I know I'm looking for photographs. This is a photographic feature, but this is what I mean about finding things in tins or, in my case, a briefcase. But it could be many things, as I said. So there's some more photographs, and there are some negatives as well. They look like, yes, they are. They're colour negs. And a letter, the Westminster Fire Office. This is from my mother when she worked. I thought it was Sun Alliance, but maybe this was an offshoot of. This looks like a letter of insurance sent to my dad for the. We have today received instructions from the Enfield Building Society to insure on your behalf the building of the private dwelling and domestic outbuildings of the above address. So this was the first. Yeah, this is the first house that my mum and dad bought, and the one I grew up in until I was 11 years old. It looks like Mum's... Well, maybe I shouldn't read this. It looks like Mum's added some more to what would have been a standard letter. Architects and surveyors' fees, yeah. The payment of losses, yes. Payment of losses relating to flood, yes. She's added on some more sections here. Section 4, treat your wife with due care and attention. 5, pay housekeeping on the day agreed. 6, agree not to go off with other women, etc., etc. Not sure that was the official language that was supposed to be used in the letter, but my mum was working in the insurance office, so obviously she was writing a formal letter in a not so formal style. Yours faithfully, she's crossed out faithfully and put yours till the cows come home. Wendy, local secretary. Oh yes, there's another bit on the end of this. Should you have any queries concerning the insurance, please be good enough to let us know so that we may arrange to call upon you at any time most suitable to you. My mum's overtyped in brackets, preferably after 10 p.m. Sorry, Mum. Should I have not revealed that? Probably not. That's funny. I've not seen that letter before. So, look, I'd be really interested. There are photographs in here, and I think what I'll do is I'll dig them out. There's some here of their engagement. Oh, look at this one. Yes, I'll dig them out. I will finish my sentence. I'll dig them out. But this one, let me tell you about this quickly. This is, Grandad had a confectioner's shop, and we've talked about this I've talked about this on the moor before. And out the back, I can't remember whether he learned in the army or not, but he also ran a barber shop on the side. And you got to the barber shop by the back gate, and you went to the confectioner's, obviously, through the front door. But out the back, there was a barber's, and here we are. There's Grandad. Look, there's Grandad. A row of chair. There's 3 chairs, and there's a sort of easy chair there. And sitting in 2 of them, I assume they to be customers. Isn't that fantastic? So I'd be very interested to know whether you have that tin, that box, that suitcase, that briefcase, whatever they reside in, that chest. Let me know. I'd be very interested to know whether you're the custodian, unwittingly, to your family history. Let's close this up safely. We have some amazing volunteers that help this show, nay, keep this show going. Andrea Gilpin enthuses me to post on Insta, and I know at times it's been an uphill journey for you, Andrea, but also Andrea makes sure reels and stories and messages are done and seen. Then Kelly Mitchell and Emily Renier have watched over the activities of the Book of Faces, it's called in our family. And Neil Ford, well, Neil is head of stuff that I don't understand, which if you listen to my kids is just about everything. Teenagers, huh? Moreover, though, Neil is in charge of IT, because he's worked in it for a long time. And when he says reboot the thing, it might work now, he's speaking from experience. IT people are indeed a special breed, and probably the most patient people you'll ever meet. They may sometimes seem like they're a little grumpy that you've asked them the same question 7 times, but you need to balance this with the fact that rarely will somebody phone them to congratulate them on a job well done. Hello, Neil. I just thought I'd let you know, computer started fine today. Thanks so much. No, they only ever get to hear the dribbled ramblings of someone who's stuck their cheese sandwich into the DVD tray by accident. So imagine this. We now have somebody who knows what the words mean in an error message and doesn't run for the hills screaming, "We're all doomed!" Now, being mainly a self-employed style of worker, I have only a few times in my life had the ability to call upon what I would call corporate IT department. At the BBC, though, we didn't actually have email or call ever to complain about a computer because standard issue to us was a filing cabinet and a typewriter. I know, shock horror, bad news and ritual firings were announced through paper memos, popped into pigeonholes that anybody could look at, to be honest. And I'm not proud of this, but being the early morning presenter and a semi-trained journalist, it was clearly my right, wasn't it, to be able to see such material? And if my hand wandered into the wrong pigeonhole occasionally, 3 along, down a couple, I'd like to believe it was done in the name of research. IT at the BBC was essentially the engineering department, and you only went in there with a strict invite. I was aghast, though mildly amused, to find out that the mass of what looked like telephone operator wires plugged into 1,000 holes on boards that reassuringly hummed a busy sound were the very path between studio and the outside world. I often wondered if the 3 engineers who frequented that room on my floor regularly really knew the pathways off by heart, or whether the leads had been there since day dot, and an engineer's job was purely to make sure nobody from presentation dared pull anything out. Each day they'd study their wires, and occasionally I'd see them twist them to keep a clean connection. One Easter Sunday morning I was allowed entry through the then unlocked door into engineering when the audio feed from the church to the studio went quiet 15 minutes prior to an outside broadcast from Ely Cathedral. I was continuity announcer in charge of said feed, studio end. I was talked through replugging the radio car feed and managed to silence the station for half an hour or so. Consequently, a big red sign that said no presenters was placed upon the door to engineering, and within a month it had a number sequence locked door too. They said it wasn't my actions that caused this, but I knew it probably was. And then my most recent dealings with IT was within a radio media channel production and artist management company, catchy, that I was a co-director at for best part of a decade after the BBC. I was rather proud of that. A director in a media company seemed very grown up. It effectively meant I'd got a car parking spot and could actually assign somebody to make me a cup of tea. Oddly, I was in charge of overseeing IT duties. I took on 2 experts to monitor that the wires in the engineering room remained untouched, and they came and went as other employers in town, namely Vodafone, offered far greater salary and perks. But each one that arrived shared common traits with the last. They lived in a room where their feet seemed permanently glued to a desktop, drove cars way too fast for them, and spoke whilst eating. They also never looked me squarely in the eye. Consequently, I could never really work out whether they were telling me the truth when they told me a server may take 3 weeks to fix. By now, paper memos had been replaced by a stream of politically insensitive emails copied to all and sundry. If you were in any way offended by my snooping in pigeonholes, this was intrusive meddling and busybodying as a sport on a grand and very public scale, except for what I thought of as the BCC squad, the coward's way of spreading tittle-tattle and point scoring. I was never very good at what was referred to in the BBC as walking the corridors, politics, and worse still at having staff or being representative of 40 or so radio presenters and voiceover artists for whom ego was a varying and sometimes toxic currency. This isn't a podcast, though, about my days in show business, I know, but it's part of my heritage, and ego is certainly a trait of all creative industries. Ego is a tinnitus of the soul, I think. Some days worse than others, and we all suffer from it. I've held studio doors shut while presenters battle with colleague journalists. I've been a shoulder to cry on when the head of all operations decided it was one of my presenters' turn to receive both barrels for mispronouncing 2 words in the midday news bulletin. Being a public company on the AIMS market, I was the one who had to fire everybody, albeit gently, when the dot-com bubble burst, and the same one who had to coax them all back in again with renewed promises when more finance became available. But I was also the one described by the board as the secret shop steward, more on the side of the workers than the cigar puffers. A character trait, they declared. One which was mildly underlined the day I insisted all management meetings could no longer allow smoking, as it affected my delicate airways. That became something regularly regurgitated if ever I spoke up for my team. Pray what has this all got to do with the title of today's snapshot? Well, everything. I shall furnish you with a story of my first 100 days in office as a freelance photographer another time, but after Monday's show, which was partly about loneliness, I thought, as much as being about a pandemic and work drying up, a few thoughts occurred. As a photographer, we're perfectly poised to observe, and that observation for me is what slows the world spinning, if only for a fleeting moment. I think it's interesting that many guests comment upon holding a camera being like, stand by now for a Potterism, like it's a form of invisibility cloak. And I feel this very much when making pictures at events like weddings. I do feel very at one with me. I'm watching the world through a viewfinder, and I'm divorced, if that's the right expression for a wedding, from the necessity to communicate verbally. I can watch, I can learn, I can record life almost in slow motion. And again on photo walks. This is something I've learned over the last couple of months, really, where I know I do more talking than taking pictures, granted, but my eye is always fixed on what I could frame up for a picture. And it seems there's a neural pathway that arrests any thought that may try and wander into shot to remind me that I must do my tax return or worry about the phone not ringing with business. Photography is a lonely occupation at times, but it's equally, I think, a sanctuary. I don't have to worry about an email and whether it carries a BCC privately in the background. I don't make pictures for competition, and if I do choose to display a picture, it'll be because it meant something to me when I made it, and I do want to share that feeling with a friend. It's a balancing act, that part, I know. If ego is the tinnitus of the soul, then photography is the vaccine for this condition. The noise of the world stops, and with that, my heart slows. I can often hear my breathing, I really can, and the satisfying sound of a shutter. In the world of radio, just to bring this full circle, I was often told that dead air or silence was equally as important as the sound made either side. 6 words were mooted as the most important words you could employ in an interview. How does that make you feel? And if a question mark were a word, I'd suggest that would be the 7th and perhaps most important word. Then, as an interviewer, you sit back and you revel in the silence and you wait for the magic. These days, some podcast apps try to close the gaps because they're worried in this social media world that we don't have time for the luxury of a pregnant pause. I switched all those features off. I'm happy if a pause can be elephantine in its gestation period. It's funny, but dead air has become a feature of how I work and feel photographically, and probably the reason my observational work, in my mind anyway, is stronger than anything I pose. I think I can do both, but there's undeniably a magic to the former coming together and stopping the world on a sixpence. No noise, no worries, no ego. I'd be interested as ever for your thoughts. I know a lot of members are quiet observers here, so it may seem that I'm asking you to break from that in contradiction to what I've just spoken about, but it's always good to hear from you, your thoughts and your ideas. And thank you, Neil Ford, for your IT help. Now get your feet off the desk. We often talk on the Extra Mile about how photography affects you personally, and one of the questions that comes from that is, what does the act of making photographs, or photography as a whole, mean to you? And here's Nikki Heppenstall from the Remember My Baby organisation answering that question.
The first thing that came to mind was my dad. I was 19 when my dad died. He was a keen photographer. There was a dark room at home when I was little. So whenever I go into a dark room and smell those chemicals, I'm immediately taken back to being yay big and being told to stand there and don't touch anything. And I have a lot of my dad's photographs. I've got some negatives that have never been printed. They're still coiled, which makes it tricky to do a contact sheet rather. And I've also had lots of his slides digitized. About 1,400 of his and 300 or 400 of mine. I've had them scanned into TIFF, and I need to curate his images, and I'd quite like to make up a couple of photo books. So my dad was a keen photographer, and it's because he died when I was 19, we never had the opportunity to properly share this. I did have a Boots Instamatic or something in my teens, but I wasn't really, interested, because you're not when you're a teenager, really. So I never had the opportunity for us to go off on a photo walk. That would have been marvellous, for us to go off and explore this and that and this place and that place and take photographs and then, compare notes later. That would have been marvellous, but it wasn't going to happen. So photography is a link with my dad, because I know we would have embraced a shared interest.
I'd like to share two final pieces with you, featuring three voices, if that's not too confusing. In a moment, and look away at that point, current patrons who kindly support this show, because I'd like to play you a few moments of this week's, yes, Extra Mile, just to bring us right up to date at the end of this special edition. I went to speak to Giles Penfound, a good friend of the show, yes, but a very, very important friend to me personally, who, with a small number of photographers in the very early days of this, there's a few too many verys here for my English teacher's liking, I would go as far to say has guided me to a point where, well, without him, I probably wouldn't have been a photographer or even making this podcast. His counsel, his belief have been vital to me. And we meet people like this occasionally, don't we? You'll hear me talking to Giles about his garden exhibition, Hometown Stories. We talk about the Camera Club, in some ways, that he's made in his hometown of Newbury. And you'll also hear from Extra Miler Harriet Langridge, who visited the Garden of Pictures at the same time as I did last Sunday. Before that, a couple of things. If what you've heard has piqued your interest today, perhaps think about supporting the show through our Patreon. I know it's a big ask, but you'll get access to the extra shows and the material you've heard today. Lots and lots and lots and lots of it. Plus, well, think of it like a reference library at times, because the extra guest features really do, I think, bring a special sprinkling of magic dust to proceedings. We also go for a walk and read the mailbag, much like we do in the Friday Photo Walk. I suppose for the price of a fancy coffee per month, it's a bit like belonging to a camera club, a community of, as I say, kindness, which it very much is. You also support the show, as I try to do more with it. Not just our adventures of a grand scale, like the Scottish and Indian adventures to come, but meetups, where you and I just get to spend time together, chatting about this thing we do. And my dream is to be able to make more material of an inspirational nature, fueled by the people I meet along the treks that we take together. So go to the website or click the link in the podcast player app that takes you to our Patreon page. It explains all about being part of this community. On the website, it's the orangey yellow button in the top right-hand corner that simply says, support the show. Before Giles and Harriet close off this special edition then, here's a piece recorded for our Patreon community that appeared quite some time ago now by Andy Fisher, a teacher, a mentor, a photographer, and the man I climbed that mountain with in Wales. I certainly couldn't have done it without him. He recorded some special thoughts about photography that I think in an otherwise noisy world are very pertinent.
The first thing I love about photography is that it opens up a space in the day where I have to slow down. I'm a dad, a full-time school teacher, and I try to stay in shape, so much of my life spent in high gear. But when I pick up my camera, I find myself naturally returning to some kind of stillness. My breathing slows, my shoulders drop, and I get to remember that I'm a human being rather than a human doing. Second, when I take the lens cap off, I start noticing more of the world around me. It can be a certain play of light on a cobbled path, or the visual rhyme between the colour of a lady's hat and a balloon being carried by a toddler coming from the opposite direction. And whether I capture these moments or not doesn't really matter. It's the quality of attention that photography affords me, which I think is the gift. And this slowing down and noticing naturally leads me towards gratitude, which is the third thing on my list. I think it was the Stoic philosopher Heraclitus who said we can't step in the same river twice because the world's always in flux. And so much of what I tend to photograph is ephemeral. It might be a gesture or an expression. But with a camera, I get to freeze time. And I think that photography, for me, is a way of saying that I was here, that I witnessed, and that these moments mattered. The fourth thing I love is how democratic photography is as an art form. It's relatively inexpensive to get started, and your age, your gender, your ethnicity, none of that matters. If you can press a button, you can be a photographer. But at the same time, you can shoot every day for a lifetime and still have a lot to learn. And finally, I love that photography gives me a medium through which I can share the way I see the world without having to use the mediation of words. My career is built around speaking and listening, but there's something pure about creating images instead. A couple of weeks ago, for example, I photographed Leslie, who's one of the security guards at the school where I teach. He's about to become a dad, and he wanted a portrait to remember this time in his life. We only had about 15 minutes in our lunch hour, and I wanted to try and capture his strength, but also this vulnerability and uncertainty. It's not the sort of thing that guys are very comfortable talking about. And when I handed him the prints a few days later, we sat looking at what we'd created, and he kind of welled up a little bit, and then he broke into this big smile. And it's moments like that that reaffirm for me the magic that can happen when we let our camera speak on our behalf.
Now, Nick, I managed to talk to Nicola, your long-suffering wife, who we've known for a long time.
I've known for quite longer than you, thankfully.
Yeah, reasonably longer, yeah. But we were talking about now seamlessly editing, or rather joining from talking about camera clubs to this picture here. It's a photograph of your very own camera club in many respects. You run the camera club that I would want to belong to, because you've thrown the rules out, really, this meeting that you do once a month. If you live in or near to Newbury, you get the opportunity to join this. Yeah. It's a wonderful meetup, isn't it, of people for whom rules, regulations don't exist.
It's a brilliant. I mean, this actual picture is not exactly that, but these people are linked to that.
They're on one of your training courses, I realise. Yeah. But they're all a part of your. I recognise them all. They're all a part of your.
With the exception of two. So
right.
So within Newbury is an organisation called the Newbury Corn Exchange.
Yep.
They're an arts foundation, and they set up a facility called Aging Creatively. And the whole idea of it is it gets people of 50s and upwards together actually to communicate with each other, to talk, and they use art as a facility to manage that. Now, blokes don't go to the painting and other creative courses, so they came up with this idea of using photography. And so once a week, they all go down to a place called the Podium Place in Newbury, which has got fancy cars and all the rest, and a nice coffee shop.
Yeah.
And it's just about engaging with each other. And actually, in many cases, photography is not important. It's about people getting together and talking, people engaging with each other. And there's, the reason is, we're going to go down to the camera club. Well, it's not a camera club. Go down to the meeting once a week, and got something to talk about. And actually, but invariably, most of the times I've been down there, I haven't talked about photography.
But the photographs are a conduit for conversation.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And it's people there. There's quite a few people there from the local camera club, which is fine. Quite a few people who are not, and so there's the photography and the coffee house and the cars bring people in, and it's just a reason to. That's just a reason to talk. Just in as much as, for me, any photograph that I make, any documentary photograph that I make, there's only a conduit to tell people about the subject. It's a subject that's important, and in this regard, it's the conversations that these people are having, because there's some really lonely people out there who just need to be able to not only to talk, but to be heard, someone to listen to. And then out of that has come this other thing that I'm doing.
I've known you for over 2 decades now. Over 2 decades. And I'd say this project, what we're looking at here, I think this is the most excited I've seen you about photography in 2 decades.
It is. Look, I don't want this to sound too fanciful, but it's absolutely true. This is the most important work I've done to date. Everything that I've done in my career was to get me to this point.
But all that army photography, your photographs were used in some respects at important war crimes tribunals, all very important, worthy work. And this, you think, is more important?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This has more meaning and relevance, and look, I love the stuff that I did before, and it gets put away occasionally and brought out occasionally. Hopefully, it'll come out again soon. But this is what I adore. This is what I absolutely love, and I believe it or not, but this is what I believe. This is my purpose.
There was a wonderful serendipitous moment when Harriet walked in today. Now, I feel very embarrassed because first of all I said to Harriet, "I know you," and of course I know Harriet. She's been a patron for ages of this programme. But out of context, when you meet somebody, sometimes I know you. Where do I know you from? I mean, you've been looking around this. Has it? You've been photographing for a long time, I know, Harriet. But do you draw in? Because I definitely do myself. Do you draw inspiration from the ordinary, extraordinary, the normal people that we meet?
I think if you don't, you're not a photographer. Yeah. I really do, because there's something in every photograph that you can take something from, however small.
Anything here that particularly has taken your fancy?
I love a lot of them. The cow, I think, is fabulous. Yeah. I really do, because it's so nosy in more ways than one. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I've just been looking at him. This is a guy leaning on what looks like a bar to me, but and it's one of your Dutch tilt. And I've stood here looking at that and thinking, how brilliant, just to look at it a slightly different way. And I think it's that sort of thing that you can learn from looking at all these sorts of things. A bit like when we were talking earlier about the Saul Leiter thing up in Milton Keynes, that not everything has to be in focus.
Tell me about that exhibition. You've been lucky enough to see. I'm not sure, because it ends very, very soon. It's
2nd of June.
Yeah, not far away now, so I probably won't get a chance to see it. But you've seen it.
Yes,
you
and
loved it.
I loved it. Yes, it's pictures of New York. He took pictures every day for 60 years, and that is an incredible feat. And the pictures off the the elevated railway, isn't it? Yes. And he was taking pictures down past the actual elevated bit to people below. So you'd got hats, you'd got umbrellas, you'd got bits of people, and it was mind-blowing, really, because you don't have to have a whole person in a picture to make it a picture. You just have to have part of a picture, or a silhouette of a person in a picture, or something like that. It was fairly mind-blowing in many respects. And the colour stuff, different to the black and white stuff, but the colour stuff was absolutely beautiful because it was the muted film colours of the 60s, 70s, but the black and whites were amazing.
Some people might say, if you live in New York, taking a photograph every day for 60 years, you're always going to find something different because it's that kind of environment. Could you do the same thing in Upper Whoop Whoop, for example, the small village with 400 people in it?
Well, you could, and I've thought about it in the town where I live, but to me, I would have to go sort of in and out of every single road to try and find something different every day. But you could do it, and Giles has been doing that in Newbury. So you know, it's not impossible. You just have to open your mind to it, I suppose.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.